Here to stay. My name is Julia McCullers. My family moved to Smithfield in 1946, and I have been a member of Centenary United Methodist Church for 67 years. As a woman who loves local history, I invite you to look back into the history of this church with me. Go back to the year 1839. It was not a particularly great year for Americans. Martin Van Buren, whom we seldom think of, was President of the United States. And a major financial panic was making life increasingly hard for our young country. 2, the smoldering issue of slavery was dividing the country along lines that would lead to the horrors of the Civil War some 25 years later. In 1839, life expectancy in North Carolina and here in Johnston County was about 45 years. In places such as Smithfield, built along the swampy Neuse River, typhoid fever and malaria took a terrible toll, and women often died in childbirth, and infant mortality was cruelly high. In 1839, North Carolina's first public school law was passed, but the government set aside not $1 to fund it. And in 1839, a North Carolina woman could not vote, could not sit on the jury, or own property. In 1839, tax income for the entire state of North Carolina was less than $200,000. And yet, in 1839, when Smithfield was a village of fewer than 500 inhabitants, dozens of its citizens pledged their hard-earned dollars to build a Methodist church here. Their pledges ranged from 25 cents, pledged by a black woman, to $300 pledged by Bython Braun, a prominent landowner. These people of faith had surnames that are still familiar to us, names like Sanders and Avera and Blackman and McCullers and Ennis and Williams and Crocker and Rayford, and of course, Smith. And at least a third of those who pledged to build a Methodist church in 1839 were women, a bit surprising in that women had very little disposable income in that era. These early Methodists bought lot number 27 in the 1803 plan of Smithfield. It was a spot 2 blocks north of here, and they built there Smithfield's first Methodist church. Soon, its strident brass bell was summoning worshipers to services. Methodism had arrived in Smithfield, and Methodism thrived. Between 1839 and 1912, our church became a sturdy presence on North 2nd Street. And by 1895, an even larger church was built on that same location. But our wise leaders knew early in the 20th century that it was time to build on a larger setting. And they chose the busy, conspicuous southwest corner of Market and 2nd Street across from the Johnston County Courthouse. They dreamed big, and they were willing to work to realize their dream. The beautiful building that these early Methodists planned was one with a brick exterior, impressive columns, lovely windows, and an intimate, stately sanctuary. It was a vision that required great faith. Faith in the church's mission. And it also required an awareness that financial commitment would be absolutely essential for years to come. We can only imagine how local Methodists must have felt as they watched their new church begin to rise and take shape 100 years ago. And we can only imagine what they envisioned that this church would do for God's work. This building was first used for worship on July 4th, 1914, and it was completely paid for, debt-free, by 1920. This dear old building, which is, of course, far, far more than just bricks and mortar and wood, has been the place where generations of Smithfield's Methodists have worshiped and prayed and planned missions and ministries that have affected thousands of lives in thousands of ways. And over the years, newcomers have strengthened this church, and their fresh outlooks and vigor have made it possible for Centenary to thrive. Now, many years after earlier Smithfield Methodists accepted their roles as stewards who were willing to give generously of their gifts and graces, now it is our turn to support the capital campaign intended to preserve and enhance the part Centenary United Methodist Church can play in God's great kingdom. Are we really, really here to stay, people of Centenary? What will future historians say about us?
Hello, my name is David Grimes. Thank you, Ms. McCullers. I am happy to join in the celebration of our Centennial Capital Campaign. I grew up in this church, as did my father, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. My great-great-grandparents were instrumental in helping this church get its start at this current location in the early 1900s. My dream is that my children and my grandchildren will be able to call this church their home for many years to come. In order for this to happen, we all need to step up to the challenge in front of us. We need to understand the pressing needs of our 100-year-old sanctuary. The pews, the ceiling, the carpet, and the choir loft where my mother sings. We also need to set aside funds for future needs of our building and to help with mission work so we can continue to strive and make disciples of all nations as Jesus commanded. At our current location, our church stands as an invitation to all who come to Smithfield. Those who came before us made this possible by responding to God's call to build this church 100 years ago. Today, I ask that all Centenary members to join me in ensuring that Centenary will continue to stand and invite people to worship and follow Jesus. Thanks again to everyone for joining this campaign.